This is Automation Hacks. I'm Gaurav Singh. In today's video, we are going to talk about behavioral interviews. If you have cleared your technical rounds like coding, system design, testing acumen, bunch of other domain specific rounds, this is often a round that you could expect to come across a bit later in the process. If you are someone who's senior or staff or principal, you can definitely expect this to be an area where a lot of focus would be given because it shows how mature you are as an engineer, what are the type of problems you have really solved, and it gives a really good signal about your communication, collaboration, and bunch of other skills. So in this video, we are going to unpack what does a behavioral interview look like, and we are going to generally ground it in the context of big tech as well as startups. So let's get started. So generally, like, what does a behavioral interview encompasses, and why do they even do it, right? So from the coding interviews or system design interviews, you get a fair sense of how the person really is technically on the job. You get some signals about their coding abilities, their sort of design skills. Do they understand distributed systems? Can they reason about applications? So on and so forth, and you get some signals about their communication skills and collaboration skills, but you don't really go deeper beyond that, right? So behavioral interview is an interview that gathers all these signals, and generally it is done by either senior engineers, hiring managers, sometimes even senior managers, directors, and so on and so forth. So it's definitely an interview to do better at. In general, what does a behavioral interview look like in practice? Well, it generally starts with something around, about uh, tell me about a time, you know. So it could be like, tell me about a time when you had like conflict with, your manager, peer, cross-functional partner. It could be, tell me about a time when you had to deliver a really challenging project. It could also be like, going deeper into your mentoring skills, and how you kind of operate in that. So this question can come in two sort of varieties. One is, of course, when they are asking you to reflect about your past experiences, such as tell me about a time, or it could even be like they can ask you some hypothetical question on what is your management philosophy, as a manager, what kind of metrics do you track, why are those metrics important, so on and so forth. So it could really take either of those, and the key thing to do well in these interviews is to be prepared. So in general, like a very common sort of industry framework that everyone recommends, and which I'm also going to like kind of suggest here, is STAR, right? So STAR basically stands for essentially four things. So you have to talk about, so what was the situation, then what did the situation demand really, right? So like what was the kind of task in this case, and what were the actions you took in this case, and lastly, what was the result or the outcome, right? So this is a good way of framing your experience and make sure that you do pretty well with these interviews. um, One other thing that many people actually forget, which I would also suggest you do, is basically learning. So out of that entire situation and whatever was the outcome, what did you learn? You may be thinking that, hey, should I be telling these learnings or not? But in general, it demonstrates growth mindset and is a really good signals for anyone who's listening. Of course, if you answer, you should try to be authentic to yourself and not really, fudge up too many facts or kind of invent things that didn't really happen. Trust me, like a seasoned interviewer will be able to tell the difference between some things that really happened versus some things that you're kind of making up on the fly. And the usual signal that differentiates a good story and something that is a bit true is essentially like, can you give relevant details, right? So there are a bunch of other aspects to this as well, and maybe we can take an example and do kind of a role play to give you a sense of it. But in general, like two additional tips that I usually find myself repeating again and again is make sure your stories are actually level appropriate. So what do I mean by that? So say you are targeting a senior engineer role in one of the big companies. The examples that you are telling should actually convey that you are ready to play that level, right? So it could be as simple as, okay, tell me about a time when you had to deal with a vague and ambiguous situation, right? If your story here is something where, a lot of the work was actually crafted by a tech lead, it was handed over to you, and you just kind of maybe implemented one component and played your part in that entire story, it is a good story. Say if you are like a mid-level engineer at this stage, but it won't be you know enough to justify a senior level kind of role. So your story has to develop and actually show that depth. So in this same example, you have to talk about, okay, what was the challenge, what was the ambiguity, what was the complexity, how you actually went about solving it, and give enough examples that shows depth. So essentially, like, did you work with multiple teams? Did you work with other senior engineers or possibly even engineers more experienced than you? Did you craft scope for other engineers? Also, like, what were the challenges you ran into, conflicts? Did you negotiate your way out of it? What specific actions you took, and so on and so forth. The more you can layer your examples with these kind of practical complexities, the better signal your interviewer is going to get that, hey, this candidate, meets that given level bar that we are looking for. So that is definitely one tip. And the second thing is, basically, don't ramble of too long, right? So what happens is sometimes you are in the flow, you are explaining the story, and you find yourself, speaking for 5 minutes without giving the opportunity to the interviewer to actually nudge you into the direction that they are more interested in. So when you're like explaining or starting with your story, say your story has multiple aspects, you can give them some options. You can tell them, hey, I can talk about how I work with a cross-functional partner in this situation, or I could talk about, what was the technical challenge? Which one would you, like me to go deeper into? Of course, don't ask all the time. They expect a candidate to lead this part of the interview for the most part, especially if you're interviewing for senior staff and above roles. But even then, like, give an opportunity for the interviewer to maybe cross question you, nudge you into the direction that they are really interested in. That's quite important. And the third tip, which I will say many people don't do, is actually, like, practice with a peer. Ideally, do a mock interview. Or if you're not able to do that, then at least, like, record yourself when you're like practicing. So this is something many people don't do, which is especially important because no one is able to, remember all the facts about certain situations, at all points of time. So you do need to make sure that you take the time to actually practice your stories. And in this particular case, in general, just look at the last three roles that you did, or at max like the last 5 years of your career. You may be a more seasoned engineer who have, multiple years of experience, but if you're telling a story that is, say, 10-year old, chances are you would have forgotten a lot of the details and it might not be very relevant to, the discussion anyway. But of course, something stands like a strong fit and you have no other options, then sure, go for it. But in general, my advice would be to keep it relevant to the last three roles, as it gives a good signal to the interviewer about relevant aspects of the story. The second thing is, once you have gone through all these different kinds of situations, you have written down your stories and examples in the star plus learning format, do set up some time, either with yourself when you're answering the question, record yourself, see what areas you're fumbling, which areas are not very clear, where you can do better, and then, like, do a repeat. Once you do it once or two times, the story is going to, become a bit more concrete. It's not really about memorizing the story per se, but remembering like the highlights or the key points that you want to get across, right? So having that write up and then reviewing it before an interview is definitely a good idea. Also, if you can get a mock interview with either a peer or someone in the industry, please go for that, because they are going to give you an objective feedback. They are going to see things which might be blind spots for you and give you feedback which might be the difference between, really landing well this interview well versus doing an okayish job and then missing out on, lot of the level and the pay benefits that come with. This is one secret, or probably an open secret, that many people are not aware of. But the behavioral interview and the system design interviews really determine your levels in senior and senior plus roles. So essentially, if you are able to land this interview really well with good communication, empathy, and all these sort of skills, yeah, chances are like, getting that senior plus role becomes a bit more achievable. So yeah, do take this interview seriously. Prepare like you prepare for any of the interviews. And let's now talk about some of the common themes that, pretty that they come up very often, as it's important to frame or orient yourself into certain directions. So some of them I already have mentioned, but let's go over it one by one. So the one thing that I want you to actually prepare for is actually your conflict stories. And when I talk about conflict stories, I'm essentially talking about, either a conflict at an upward level, so with your manager or something. These kind of stories you have to prepare a bit, carefully. You do want to express what was the challenge, but you don't want to speak too negatively, as it shows you in a negative color. Similarly, like any conflict with a peer on the same team member. Examples of this could also be like, working with a challenging peer, working with a person on the team that is not pulling their weight and stuff like that. How did you kind of deal with that situation? And another variation of this kind of question is also like, cross-functional partners. So say you are a software engineer and you're working in a team and you have like product stakeholders, business stakeholders, sales, marketing, any sort of situations where, there were tight deadlines, there were a lot of unrealistic demands. How did you deal with these kind of situations? Essentially like, showing off how you are working with vague and ambiguous situations, and can you deal that, is it's a good topic that people usually get into. The second big theme here is, of course, like, if you are interviewing for a role that demands management, say like a tech lead or even like a EM, then there could be aspects around basically like, how do you manage? So essentially, like, what is your management philosophy? What are the metrics you track? How do you do performance management? A time when you had to manage out a low performer, time when you had to support a team member through a challenging situation, again, support them through conflicts, create a growth path, bunch of topics like these. If you are mostly targeting for an IC role, the scope of this kind of question might mostly be around mentoring skills, um, ensuring that, you play your part in growing the other engineers on your team, which is of course a large part of the role even as a technical leader. And then the other set of questions here are mostly around, like your experience. So a variation of these could be essentially, where the interviewer does a resume walkthrough. So they go through like your prior experience, they drill deeper into like, what was the role you were actually hired for, who was your manager, what was your experience there, um, what are your strengths and weaknesses, what are the areas you didn't do well, did you reflect on them? And here they are actually looking for patterns and signals that are a bit recurring. So they may choose to actually go over this kind of interview for your past few companies, just to see like how you are as a person and how do you deal with situations. This is also a good test of course, your empathy and your sort of communication skills as well. So throughout this interview, they are checking how good of a communicator are you able to convey your thoughts properly? Are you able to explain yourself in a good way? And so on and so forth, right? So, yeah, in general, like I will say, conflict, dealing with people, mentoring, your personal experience, and in general, like another aspect that this interview can focus on sometimes, even though you may have touched upon it in the technical rounds, is mostly like, what is your contribution to the team? Like, what are the unique innovation or hard challenges or hard problems you have solved? So here the signal is again more around technical depth, complexity, dealing with vague and ambiguous situations, defining scope, project management skills, bunch of other things, or sometimes even like, did something that you do actually stand out? Are you a person who understands technology deep enough to kind of give examples where you have, really built innovative solutions or dealt with these situations in an innovative way? Yeah, this is like a core skill that many teams do assess for. And yeah, don't be surprised if you get a more technical interviewer at this stage and they actually go a bit deeper into, such kind of examples as well. So yeah, do have those sort of hard problems that you have done in all your past roles. I would usually recommend you to not have just one story, actually have three stories per role, and maybe like in different categories, so that even if you have like multiple of these rounds, you do have like a, bank of stories to go through. And one good practice, of course, to build this kind of knowledge bank is to, of course, have a good journaling habit. So I'll create a video on this, and I've also written a blog, which I can link in this video. And hopefully that should give you an idea of how to use work journaling in a way wherein it kind of helps you with these kind of interviews in the future. Um, so yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about on behavioral interviews. I hope this video is useful to you, and you now have a better frame of mind about behavioral interviews specifically, what can be asked and how can you prepare. Let me know in the comments if there are some specific questions that are asked which you were unclear about on how to answer, and we can, of course, discuss about it. And if you have feedback about the videos or the channel, do tell me in the comments. I think it will help this channel grow and be more useful to more people. Also, if you like this content, do give it a like, share it with your colleagues, and definitely subscribe to the channel as it definitely helps. And thank you, and I'll see you in the next one.